Hello, this week I bought these. Aren't they fab? We may or may not think that they are salt cellars. They have, rather remarkably, almost all their original mercury gilding, and that's why they still have it, by the way. Electro gilding, which came in around 1840, is pretty rubbish. It allows the silversmith to deposit a very thin layer of gold. Before that, you had to make a gold and mercury paste, you had to fire it, and actually the bond was much stronger, but also the layer of gold you left on the interior was that much thicker. So you'll often find Georgian pieces retain their gilding and Victorian pieces don't. Now, did I buy them just because they're lovely Georgian salt cellars? Well, you know me, no. I bought them because they were catalogued as London. And I do not blame the auctioneer for that at all, but they aren't. And I'm going to tell you why. First, let's look at the base and the hallmarks. And the first thing that strikes you, the first thing that struck me when I saw them is, look how irregularly the marks are struck. We've got the duty mark, the standard mark, and the town mark, which is the leopard's head crown, which is the London town mark, which is why I don't blame the auctioneer for saying they're London at all. But they're all higgledy-piggledy. That would never happen in London, not at this period anyway. It would all be very formal, and the marks would probably be struck on a stub, which means they're actually cut together in one punch, side by side, so they're very regular. So I knew immediately something was up. The maker wasn't identified, but the maker's mark is M&R. Now, the maker in this case is definitive. There is only one M&R mark recorded in the British Isles, and it's Mitchell and Russell. This, however, doesn't help us with the leopard's head, because they were working in Scotland and they were based in Glasgow. And as we know, there's one thing you don't get, it's English hallmarks on Scottish silver. So there is a problem there, but there's also some intrigue. But I had a look at the marks, and because I'm a bit of an anorak, I recognised, and I'll show you this briefly in close-up. I know a lot of you don't watch the close-up videos, and I don't blame you, only the diehards. That particular form of lion passant was used at Newcastle. So these are actually a pair of Newcastle Georgian silver salt cellars, which immediately makes them much more interesting. The fact that they've got a Glasgow maker's mark in the middle makes them even more interesting than that. Because how often do you find a piece of Newcastle silver overstamped by a Scottish maker? Not very often. Basically, these were supplied to Mitchell and Russell, who started business in 1803 and carried through to the 1840s. But these marks, this cusp duty mark, that has to be post 1797. This standard mark was used commonly up until about 1800, but it's been seen on pieces as late as 1804, 1805. And then it changes, the style of lion passant changes on all the silver. So even though these don't have a date letter on them, which is not an uncommon thing for Newcastle silver of the early 19th century, you'll see salt cellars, you'll see cream jugs particularly, no date letter, but we're able to look at this, and because we know when Mitchell and Russell were working, and because we know when this lion passant went out, we can say confidently these will date to between 1803 and 1805 at the latest. And I suppose if a big partnership is setting up and they want to offer a range of silver in Glasgow and they're not up and running, they will seek to get in supplies. I'm just very surprised there wasn't an Edinburgh goldsmith that was competitively supplying them with objects like this, which were certainly made in Edinburgh, no problem at all finding out all manner of silver, but they chose to get it from Newcastle. And I can only imagine that either there was some existing link between the firm of Mitchell and Russell and somebody in Newcastle, a family tie possibly. There was a firm of silversmiths in Newcastle called Mitchell, but I can't see any relationship between those two. And actually the mark that is overstruck, because they were originally fully marked for Newcastle with the Newcastle maker's mark, and then all Mitchell and Russell have done is overstruck their mark and obliterated that. There's enough on one of them to see the base of a T and possibly the base of a W. That ties in with Thomas Watson, who at the period was the biggest manufacturing silversmith in Newcastle. So he would certainly be in a position to supply and manufacture objects for other goldsmiths. So that all ties in and makes sense. He must have been doing it very cheaply. Glasgow is, for those of you who haven't Google mapped it by now, as I've just done, Glasgow's over 150 miles from Newcastle. And, you know, if you were going to drive that in a car today, that would be a headache. But if you were going to send precious silver wrapped up, uninsured, as a cargo by coach and horses, 150 miles, I think you might have been considered insane. I don't know, but I think they might have ordered a large parcel of silver, one parcel of silver, and it may have been sent by ship. Much easier at that period, much cheaper to send a single packed box from Newcastle. Of course, it would take longer, but I wonder if that mattered quite as much. And certainly the very interesting thing is I've tried to look for more Newcastle silver with Mitchell and Russell's mark on, overstriking the maker. I've found one piece, which is a little waiter that sold about 7 years ago at auction in the Channel Islands, and that was dated. That had a Newcastle date letter to it, which was interesting, because that was dated 1812. So that shows you that however long and successful this relationship was, it was at least a 9 to 10 year working relationship with Mitchell and Russell of Glasgow buying in some Newcastle silver. So that's an interesting quirk. But pieces of Newcastle silver bearing Mitchell and Russell's mark are going to be phenomenally rare. The fact that I found these and one little waiter, that's all it seems to be a record of. I'm sure there are other things. They wouldn't have had a 10-year period and only just done 2 salt cellars and a waiter, but it's rare, it's uncommon, and it tells you the story of how these things moved and sold. The most interesting thing, though, for me, is that they are, when you look at the engraving, I hope we can see this, they're engraved with a band of thistles. So that is, you more ardently Scottish decoration you could not wish for. But who did it? Was this the value that Mitchell and Russell were adding to the objects as they came in? Maybe plain from Watson, and they thought, we'll improve these for the domestic market, and we'll get our engraver to do thistles. But the way the engraving is done is quite free and open, and also the same engraving that's done here is replicated around the base here, where the little bull feet go, and the bull feet goes over that engraving. So if you were going to do that and then put the feet on, you're doing it during the manufacture. So it strongly suggests that Mitchell and Russell put in the order to Watson, we want this silver, but we want it engraved with a band of thistles for our customers. And in that respect, it's going to be the only Newcastle silver that you see with Scottish themed decoration on it. So all of a sudden, a pair of London salt cellars in a sale this week have become a story of two firms of important goldsmiths, one in Newcastle, one in Glasgow, one making objects to the designs and request of the other and sending them possibly under sale by ship the 150 miles, well, that's across land, it would be hundreds more miles around the coast and then sold on. All in lovely condition, all with beautiful marks, all with original gilding. And sadly, or happily, but I think it's quite sad at the moment, because of the roaring silver prices, purchased for their scrap value at auction, which is quite terrifying, which in the few days that I've had them has gone up slightly. So I could go and make £5 now if I drove over them in the car, which is slightly depressing. And I would ask all the silver dealers out there that are scrapping hundreds, if not thousands of ounces of silver each week, think of your children if they want to be silver dealers, because there ain't going to be any left. But there we go. It's a world of opportunity out there at auction, and often because people don't study hallmarks religiously, they just rely on a little pocketbook like that and flick through it. And as I say, I don't blame the auctioneer for thinking they're London, but if you've followed me and you've gone through these videos, you'll begin to appreciate all the subtleties you have to look at, how the marks are struck in the first place, the positions on the objects, the styles of the punches. When we do the close-up, this leopard's head is a very odd, thin, nondescript leopard's head. It's not a London punch at all. So these are all the factors you have to consider. But if you do, and if you look out, you can buy fabulous bits of important provincial silver like this. So that's it for this week. I think that was quite good. It wasn't a pair of sugar tongs or a pair of buckles. Next week, it might be a pair of sugar tongs or a pair of buckles, or it may be both. We'll see how the post is going. But until then, good antiques hunting and goodbye.